Hey, so got some bad news earlier today. The moment that every Affinity player has been dreading for several years has finally come to pass. Mox Opal is banned, and so traditional Affinity is dead. There's been people that have been trying to play budget Affinity without Mox Opal for a long time, but I think it's very clear that Mox Opal was the best card in Affinity by quite a lot, and it was what made the deck viable. As a fast aggro strategy, it kind of relied on Mox Opal to create its best draws. And without it, you're kind of restricted to playing at a regular regular pace compared to the occasional turns where you started with 2 mana on turn 1. Because of that, I don't think that from the spike mindset there will ever be a reason to play traditional Affinity or Affinity likes again. It is possible that you could play an artifact-based aggro deck and have some amount of success, but I do not believe there will ever be a compelling reason to play Affinity instead of one of the more powerful aggro decks in the format, because I don't see why you would ever play Mox Opal-less Affinity compared to, say, Humans. Because without Mox Opal, Affinity is not going to be particularly faster than Humans, and Humans has better disruption. So, it was fun while it lasted. I did love Affinity. It was a great deck for a long time, and then it was a fine deck for a while, and then it was just a deck that I kind of played for fun for a bit, every once in a while, but I'm not going to be trying to make Artifact aggro work without Mox Opal, because that is the reason you would play it. It's not goodbye forever for Arcbound Ravager, because I do believe that there is a chance that Hardened Scales is still viable without Mox Opal. While I played Hardened Scales, I wasn't a huge fan of Opal, and often trimmed a couple or even cut them entirely, because Mox Opal did not mesh as well with Hardened Scales. And when I say that, what I mean is Hardened Scales was mostly reliant on playing 2-drops. All of its best cards cost 2 mana. You had Ravager, you had Steel Overseer, you had Hangerback, you had Ballista. Just the list goes on of really good 2-drops in that deck. And it also had a very hard time, unless you went out of your way, enabling a turn 1 Opal to play a 2-drop on turn 1. And so on turn 1, you couldn't really play a 2-drop, and on turn 2, you could play a 2-drop, but it was very unlikely that you had, unless you had double Opal and Lotus Petaled one of them, you didn't have the ability to play 2-2-drops on turn 2. So on turn 3, it would let you play 2-2-drops, but that was the first turn that Opal would really kind of accelerate you into making a significant play earlier most of the time. And so for that reason, I never felt like, compared to most Mox Opal decks, Hardened Scales was singularly bad at using Mox Opal. The reason it used Mox Opal was just because it was, a busted card. And so the fact that it used Mox Opal because it was busted, but not specifically key to its game plan, is why I think that Hardened Scales could still be viable. Obviously, I haven't actually played Hardened Scales in Modern in like 6-8 months. And Hardened Scales has other things that it needs to worry about, including the fact that Karn Great Creator still exists, but Karn might not see anywhere near as much play now that Lattice is gone and Opal is gone, so I guess Opal didn't really matter to it. But because the artifact decks are on a downturn, and because Lattice is gone, so the Lattice Lock combo isn't a thing anymore, and now it's just a toolbox for a bunch of okay-ish cards, as opposed to a toolbox for a bunch of cards and also a win condition on its own. I don't expect to see Karn Great Creator anywhere near as much as it used to. So Hardened Scales might not be dead. I think we'll have to see. I think there's a possibility that new builds need to be built, find what's optimal and what works in this metagame. Thank God. Thank God that Oko is banned. Stupid card. So, anyways, Hardened Scales is still viable, potentially. Where does Modern go in general from here? I really don't know. This has been a turbulent year for Magic, but also for Modern specifically, with Modern Horizons creating a whole bunch of new decks, and then the Hogak, and then Hogak getting banned from Hogak. Hogak comes back again. Faithless Looting getting banned. Urza decks going on the rise. Oko getting printed, and also Karn Great Creator. It's just been a fucking crazy year for Modern. Definitely more dramatic than any of the Moderns previously. I think that Tron is probably going to be a very strong contender right now. Tron is not hurt significantly by any of these bans. Like, it did play Karn Great Creator and Lattice, but it was good before that was adopted. It was even better after the London Mulligan. Now that a whole bunch of stuff is getting banned, like, I think Tron might end up being the top or near the top, along with other big mana decks. And if a whole bunch of big mana decks become viable, then we could see Blood Moon decks being useful. We could see a whole bunch of these other decks that have kind of fallen off recently. Infect might end up being a very powerful thing. In fact, I would be surprised if Infect wasn't Infect and Burn being the premier aggressive decks of the format. All of the mid-rangey decks that were playing Oko certainly got nerfed because they don't have Oko, but they can go back to doing whatever it was before everyone had to play Oko because the card was busted. Urza is still around. It's possible that without Opal, Urza decks still play like the paradoxical outcome stuff. Because with Urza, Opal isn't better than any other zero that you could play. So the main loss of Opal is that you're not getting a turn 1 Emery or a turn 2 Sai or a turn 3 Urza. So it might go... maybe you could see outcome decks become a bit slower, playing like, Emery Urza, Sai, but also, try to... I don't know. I don't really know what happens for those decks. Certainly, losing Oko and Opal definitely put a hit on the Urza decks. But I would be a little surprised to see Urza never see play again. Over 55% win rate, yeah. 40% of decks had Oko. Weaken Urza decks. So, I think that's kind of where Modern's probably headed. I don't think the format's going to die. I think the format's going to come back. It's possible that it gets healthier and better than it's been for quite a while. In fact, I expect that to be the case. I think a lot of the decks that are coming around certainly can be fought. Um, you can fight. You can fight Tron. You can fight Urza. You can fight. The other big mana decks. So it could be an exciting new period for Modern. But certainly for all of us that loved playing Mox Opal, and not specifically because it had broken decks, but just because it enabled decks that would otherwise be underpowered. It's a bit unfortunate for us, especially if you had, hundreds or thousands of dollars of cards that are significantly less useful now that Opal is dead. For me, I'm much more looking forward to Pioneer now. I mean, all of my favorite Modern decks are dead. Like, Affinity's dead. Cheerios is dead, which was one of my pet decks for a long time. Completely impossible to play that deck without Opal. It just doesn't work because your combo is gone. It had to have Mox Opal to do anything because that was how it generated the mana it needed to win. So that deck is shot to death. So all of the things that I loved in Modern are kind of dead. There's been other decks that I've had fun playing, but I'm looking at Pioneer mostly moving forward. And the deck that I'm most excited to play just got shouted out as, that's probably going to get banned. I do not disagree with their approach of, our philosophy of Pioneer is to let it prove through play results that it needs to get banned. I agree. I think the timing is a little unfortunate that Heliod comes out right before, the first Pioneer Pro Tour, and I could definitely see this combo being so good that it takes over the Pro Tour and then turns people off of Pioneer because they're like, oh, there's just this one stupid deck. It's like, well, Pioneer's pretty healthy right now. There's a pretty good variety of decks that are doing well. Big Red being a deck that anyone can play is kind of an indication that the format's in an okay place, because if some Big Red deck that likes killing creatures is, a legit deck, then I think your format's in a pretty decent spot. Obviously, I hate playing against blue-white control, but I think that's the only... that's just because most people hate playing against control. But, it's also good that it's a viable deck and not either oppressive or underpowered. Like, you should have a control deck in a reasonable format. And so Pioneer currently looks like it's got a pretty good mix of aggro, mid-range control with a splash of combo in the Lotus Field decks. I just do wish that the combo decks were a little bit less obnoxious. Like, if you ask me, I would rather lose to Heliod and Ballista a million times than have to play against Lotus Field or Wilderness Reclamation nonsense decks, just because, God, fuck those decks that take forever to win with their combo. Like, at least with Heliod and Ballista, you just like, okay, I'm dead, thanks. Right? Maybe that's just me, but I enjoy being able to say, all right, you got it, let's go to the next game, as opposed to having to wait to go like, do you fizzle yet? 10 minutes later, do you fizzle yet? Anyways, personal opinion, I understand that people enjoy playing those decks, and it's fine that they exist. I just think that, when Nexus was top tier and you could expect to play it with regularity, it's just like, I never enjoyed playing against that deck, ever. Unless they just stumbled and died, and then it was more of an enjoyment of, haha, die, sucker. So, for me, the next thing I do with Magic is when Heliod and Walking Ballista are a thing, I'll be brewing up a whole bunch of white decks featuring both of them. I do like the idea of mono-white Devotion more than trying to play some green-white Hardened Scales thing. I think Hardened Scales with Heliod is probably not where you want to be. Hardened Scales, Heliod seems to dilute the good things that Hardened Scales is doing, and I think you'd rather just play a mono-green or green-black Scales deck than try to work Heliod into it. I could see green-white just like life gain cord type stuff to set up the combo being playable, but I don't think Hardened Scales will be part of the best version of Heliod. I did play a bit with Mono White Devotion on the weekend, just to try to experiment with what cards do I like in Mono White Devotion, what cards do I not like, and there's a lot of interesting cards there. I think Selfless Spirit is certainly going to be a really good card for those decks in general. It's going to help a lot against control, against removal. It's going to be just another thing that makes beating those decks a pain in the ass. Knight of the White Orchid is an interesting card. It's very powerful, and also I kind of hate playing with the thing, because the more I play with it, the more I'm like trying to put off my 2-drop so I can get value out of this Knight of the White Orchid thing is just kind of annoying. Anafenza seems like she can be pretty excellent with the Walking Ballista Heliod combo. Enables the turn 4 win. Is just generically good as 2 white pips for 2/2. The random bolster's okay. There's a Thraben Inspector, going to certainly see play in every one of those decks. I think, honestly, if you're playing white-based creatures and you're not playing Thraben Inspector, just really, I don't know. I did like going up the curve with Angels. I think Lyra is particularly good. She kind of just wrecks a lot of decks right now, and basically, if she doesn't die to Murderous Rider out of Mono Black, they can't beat her. If Red can't just burn her out, they can't beat her. She just completely owns Green, because Green just looks at a giant flying First Striker lifelink and they're like, we can't attack into it, we can't race. I did play with the Meld Angels, Bruna and Gisela, and they were actually pretty decent. I particularly liked having Resplendent Angel, the 3-mana 3/3 from M20 that makes angels if you gain enough life. Curving that into Gisela into any way to gain 1 extra life or put 1 extra power onto Gisela, and then making angels. That was a really strong curve when your opponent was low on specific removal. So there's a lot of interesting things I think you can do with Mono White. Also, if you're going for the Mono White Devotion, which is more focused on the combo, Arcanist's Owl can be real good. But so I'm really excited to start trying to make Mono White mid-range with Heliod and Walking Ballista work. That's going to be fun. There's other decks in Pioneer that are fun. The Planeswalker deck is sweet as hell whenever you play it, and it works. Just needs the right metagames to flourish. Yeah, so I'm not going to stop making content for this channel, I guess. But there's not going to be any Affinity content because Affinity is dead. So if you only watch my stuff to see Affinity, well, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. But yeah, don't expect me to be trying to make Opal-less Affinity work in the future. But if you want to see interesting brews, I try to create some novel decks pretty frequently, and sure, most of them kind of suck. Sometimes you get ones that are pretty decent, like I think the Fires one. Certainly, I saw enough people continue to play the Fires Planeswalkers decks in various iterations after I had stopped playing a lot of it. But yeah, thanks for watching.